What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected legends walks into what should be a routine talk show appearance, only to discover the host has a hidden agenda that crosses every line of professional decency? Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that had Harrison Ford storming off the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, leaving producers scrambling and audiences stunned. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is a masterclass in how power dynamics in Hollywood can turn toxic in an instant. Before we get into the shocking details, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below with your thoughts, because you're going to want to share your reaction to what you're about to hear. The tension in Studio 6A was palpable. From the moment Harrison Ford stepped onto the set, what started as a promotional appearance for his latest project quickly devolved into something far more sinister. Ford, known for his no-nonsense approach to interviews and his legendary disdain for Hollywood theatrics, had agreed to appear on Kimmel's show as a favor to the studio. Little did he know that Kimmel had prepared what he thought would be comedic gold, but what would actually become a career-defining moment of poor judgment as Ford settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had done this dance countless times before. Kimmel's opening seemed standard enough. The usual pleasantries, the obligatory compliments about Ford's enduring career, the setup for what audiences expected would be light-hearted banter about his latest film. But those who knew Kimmel's style could sense something different in his demeanor, a barely contained excitement that suggested he had something special planned. "Harrison, it's great to have you back on the show," Kimmel began, his trademark grin spreading across his face. "You know, I was doing some research for tonight's interview, and I came across some really interesting stories about your early days in Hollywood. Some real behind-the-scenes stuff that I think our audience would love to hear about." Ford's expression remained neutral, but those familiar with his body language could detect the slight tensing of his shoulders. "Well, Jimmy, I've been around long enough that there are plenty of stories. Some worth telling, some not so much." "Oh, but these are definitely worth telling," Kimmel pressed, leaning forward with an intensity that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "In fact, I have some photos here that I think might help jog your memory." This was the moment when seasoned Hollywood observers in the audience began to realize something was very wrong. Ford's publicist, seated in the front row, visibly straightened up, her phone already in hand. The veteran actor's face remained impassive, but his hands, which had been relaxed on the armrests, now gripped them slightly. "Jimmy, I'm not sure what you're getting at, but I'm here to talk about my current project," Ford said, his voice carrying that distinctive edge that had made Han Solo's threats so memorable. "Let's keep this professional." Kimmel's laugh was sharp, almost manic. "Oh, come on, Harrison. Where's your sense of humor? I mean, we're all friends here, right? And friends share embarrassing stories about each other. It's what makes good television." The audience, sensing the shift in tone, had grown noticeably quieter. What had started as anticipatory energy was now uncomfortable tension. Ford's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his words were measured and deliberate. "I think there might be some confusion about what kind of interview this is supposed to be, Jimmy. When my people agreed to this appearance, we were told it would be a standard promotional interview, not whatever this is turning into." "Relax, Harrison," Kimmel said, but his tone suggested anything but relaxation. "I'm just trying to give our audience some real insight into the man behind the movies. Isn't that what good journalism is about? Getting to the truth." The word journalism hung in the air like a challenge. Ford's laugh was short and humorless. "Journalism? Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like ambush entertainment." Kimmel's mask was beginning to slip. The jovial host persona was giving way to something more aggressive, more desperate. "Look, Harrison, I've got a show to do here. And frankly, your whole mysterious, reluctant celebrity thing is getting a little old. Our audience wants to see the real you, not this carefully constructed image your publicists have built. The real me." Ford's voice dropped to that low, dangerous register that had made his portrayals of frustrated characters so compelling. "The real me is someone who honors his commitments, shows up on time, and treats people with respect. The real me is also someone who doesn't appreciate being blindsided by hosts who think they're investigative reporters." The studio had grown so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he was losing control of the situation, doubled down with the desperation of someone who had invested too much in a bad hand. Come on, Harrison, don't be such a stick in the mud. I mean, you've made a career out of playing these tough guys, but when it comes to real life, you can't handle a little friendly probing? What happened to that Han Solo confidence? Ford's response was immediate and cutting. Han Solo is a character, Jimmy. A fictional character. I'm a real person, and real people have boundaries. Something you apparently never learned. The insult landed like a physical blow. Kimmel's face flushed, and for a moment, his composure cracked completely. Oh, I see. So now you're going to lecture me about boundaries? That's rich, coming from someone who spent 40 years being difficult to work with. The gasps from the audience were audible now. This had crossed from uncomfortable television into something approaching a public confrontation. Ford's publicist was on her feet, making urgent gestures toward the control booth. But Ford himself remained seated, his gaze fixed on Kimmel with laser-like intensity. Difficult to work with, Ford repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. You know, Jimmy, I've worked with some of the greatest directors in the history of cinema. Ridley Scott, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas. If they found me difficult, they certainly kept hiring me. But then again, they're professionals. They understand the difference between challenging work and cheap shots. Kimmel was spiraling now, his voice rising with each word. Oh, spare me the name dropping. We all know you've been coasting on those same 3 franchises for decades. When was the last time you took a real risk? When was the last time you did anything that wasn't just Harrison Ford playing Harrison Ford? The question hung in the air, like a gauntlet thrown down. Ford's silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with steel. You want to know about taking risks, Jimmy? Here's a risk. For you. Ford leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. The risk is sitting here, in front of your audience, and letting them see exactly what kind of person you really are when you think the cameras give you power over your guests. The words hit Kimmel like a slap. His nervous laugh sounded forced and hollow in the suddenly silent studio. What's that supposed to mean? I'm just doing my job here, Harrison. Asking the tough questions. Tough questions. Ford's eyebrows raised slightly, and for the first time since the confrontation began, there was something almost amused in his expression. Jimmy, tough questions come from preparation, research, and genuine curiosity. What you're doing is throwing accusations and hoping something sticks. There's a difference between journalism and harassment. Kimmel's face was getting redder by the minute. The control booth was frantically signaling, but he was too far gone to pay attention. Harassment? That's what you call this. I'm trying to have a real conversation here, not just another boring promotional interview where you give the same rehearsed answers you've been giving for 20 years. You want a real conversation? Ford's voice carried a dangerous calm. Then let's have one. Let's talk about preparation. Let's talk about professionalism. Let's talk about the fact that your producers called my representatives 3 weeks ago and specifically outlined what this interview would cover. None of what you're doing right now was mentioned in that conversation. The accusation landed hard. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and his usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned him. Look, sometimes interviews take unexpected turns. That's what makes good television. No, Jimmy, that's what makes bad television, Ford replied, his tone now carrying the weight of 4 decades in the entertainment industry. Good television respects both the guest and the audience. It doesn't rely on ambush tactics and manufactured drama to generate views. The audience was completely silent now, some looking uncomfortable, others leaning forward with fascination. This wasn't the usual celebrity spat they were witnessing. This was a masterclass in dignity under fire. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was losing the room entirely, decided to escalate further. Oh, please, don't lecture me about television. I've been doing this show for years, and I know what works. Maybe the problem isn't my approach. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being challenged. Maybe you're just too old and too set in your ways to adapt to how interviews work now. The ageism accusation was the final straw for many in the audience. Several people actually gasped audibly. Ford's publicist was now standing, clearly preparing to intervene, but Ford raised a subtle hand, signaling her to wait. Too old, Ford repeated, his voice carrying a hint of genuine sadness now. You know, Jimmy, I've been in this business since before you were born. I've seen hosts who could make their guests feel comfortable while still getting great material. I've seen interviewers who could ask difficult questions without resorting to personal attacks. I've worked with people who understood that respect isn't weakness, it's professionalism. Well, maybe those days are over, Kimmel snapped, his composure completely gone now. Maybe audiences don't want that fake politeness anymore. Maybe they want real, authentic moments, even if they're uncomfortable. Ford's smile was sharp as a blade. Authentic? Jimmy, there's nothing authentic about this. This is manufactured controversy designed to generate clips for social media. You're not interested in authenticity, you're interested in going viral. The accusation hit home so hard that Kimmel actually flinched. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Ford's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen it all. Then explain to me why your cameras are positioned differently tonight. Explain why there are more crew members than usual. Explain why I can see at least 3 phones recording from the audience when your usual policy prohibits that. The observations were delivered with the precision of someone trained to notice details, and the effect on Kimmel was devastating. He looked around frantically, as if seeing his own show for the first time. I don't know what you're implying, Kimmel stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm not implying anything, Ford replied calmly. I'm stating facts. This entire setup was designed to create a confrontation. The question is why? What did I ever do to you personally that made you think this was appropriate? The personal question seemed to catch Kimmel off guard. For a moment, his aggressive facade cracked, and something more vulnerable showed through. You want to know what you did? You've spent 40 years acting like you're above all this. Like the whole entertainment industry is beneath you. Like doing interviews is some kind of burden you have to endure. Ford's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Jimmy, I've never said the industry is beneath me. I've said that certain practices within the industry are unprofessional. There's a difference. I take my work seriously because I respect the craft and I respect the people who pay to see the results. But you don't respect the process, Kimmel shot back, some of his fire returning. You don't respect the promotional side, you don't respect the interviews, you act like it's all just noise that gets in the way of your real work. You're right, Ford said simply, and the admission seemed to surprise everyone in the studio, including Kimmel. I don't enjoy the promotional process, but I do it because it's part of the job. And when I do it, I try to do it professionally. And honestly, what I don't do is use it as an opportunity to settle personal scores or create drama for entertainment value. Kimmel looked like he'd been punched. Personal scores? What personal scores? Ford's laugh was genuinely amused now. Jimmy, you just spent 10 minutes attacking my career, my age, my work ethic, and my personality on national television. If that's not personal, what would you call it? I call it doing my job, Kimmel replied, but the words sounded weak even to him. No, Ford said, standing up slowly from his chair. Your job is to entertain your audience while promoting your guests' projects. My job was to be here, answer your questions professionally, and help you do that. But somewhere along the way, you decided your job was to tear me down instead of building up your show. The movement of Ford standing created a ripple of tension through the studio. Camera operators adjusted their angles instinctively, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Sit down, Harrison, Kimmel said, and for the first time, there was actual pleading in his voice. We're not finished here. Ford looked down at him with something that might have been pity. Jimmy, we were finished the moment you decided to turn this into a personal attack instead of a professional interview. The question now is whether you're going to let me leave with some dignity intact, or whether you're going to make this even worse for yourself. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword of Damocles. Kimmel's face cycled through several emotions: confusion, anger, desperation, and finally, a kind of stubborn defiance that would prove to be his biggest mistake of the night. Kimmel's defiance manifested in the worst possible way. Instead of taking the graceful exit Ford had offered, he doubled down with a sneer that would haunt his career for years to come. You know what, Harrison? Don't threaten me on my own show. You think you can just walk in here, act like you're doing me some kind of favor, and then storm off when things don't go exactly your way? This is my house, and I'll run my interviews however I want. The words echoed through the studio like a death knell. Ford paused, his hand resting on the back of his chair, and slowly turned back to face Kimmel. When he spoke, his voice carried The quiet authority of someone who had faced down fictional villains and real Hollywood executives with equal composure. Your house, Ford repeated, his tone deceptively calm. Interesting choice of words, Jimmy, because in most people's houses, guests are treated with basic courtesy. In most people's houses, there's something called hospitality. But apparently, your house operates by different rules. Kimmel's confidence was cracking, but he pushed forward anyway. Look, if you can't handle a little heat, maybe you shouldn't. Be in the kitchen. This is how modern television works. This is what audiences want to see. What audiences want to see, Ford said, gesturing toward the crowd that had grown increasingly uncomfortable throughout the exchange, is authenticity. Real conversation. What they're seeing instead is a host who's lost control of his own show and is trying to blame his guest for his lack of professionalism. The camera captured every micro-expression on Kimmel's face as the words hit home. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a venom that shocked even his own production team. You want to talk about professionalism? Let's talk about how you've spent the last 30 years phoning it in. Let's talk about how you've been playing the same character over and over again, just with different costumes. Let's talk about how you've turned being difficult into a brand, and now you're surprised when someone calls you on it. The attack was so vicious, so personal, that several audience members actually looked away. Ford's publicist started moving toward the stage, but once again, Ford held up a hand to stop her. His composure was remarkable, almost superhuman in its steadiness. Jimmy, Ford said, and his voice carried a sadness that made the attack seem even more cruel by comparison. I came here tonight as a professional courtesy. I didn't have to be here. I could have done any number of other shows, but your people specifically requested this appearance. They said you were a fan. They said you respected my work. Was any of that true, or was this always the plan? For a moment, just a moment, something human flickered in Kimmel's eyes. But then his ego reasserted itself, and he made the fatal error that would define this entire encounter. The plan was to get some honest answers instead of the same boring publicity speak you've been giving for decades. The plan was to show people that Harrison Ford isn't some untouchable Hollywood legend. He's just another actor who got lucky with a few good roles. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Ford stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, then slowly nodded as if something had finally become clear to him. I see, he said quietly. So this was never about the interview. This was never about promoting my project. This was about you trying to tear down someone you perceive as having something you want. Respect, maybe. Longevity. The kind of career that doesn't depend on manufactured controversy. Kimmel's laugh was bitter and desperate. Oh, spare me the psychology lesson. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? You think your little Han Solo quips and your grumpy old man routine make you special. No, Jimmy, Ford replied, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the studio lean forward. I think treating people with respect makes you decent. I think honoring your commitments makes you professional. And I think knowing when to stop makes you wise. 3 things you've demonstrated tonight that you clearly struggle with. The devastation in Ford's voice was matched by the precision of his words. Kimmel looked like he'd been physically struck, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to follow. You can't talk to me like that, Kimmel sputtered, his voice rising to near shouting levels. This is my show, I'm the host here, and I don't have to sit here and take lectures from some washed-up action star who thinks he's too good for television. The insult was the breaking point. Ford's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle straightening that conveyed more authority than any raised voice could have managed. Washed up, Ford repeated, his tone almost conversational. You know, Jimmy, I've been called a lot of things in my career. Difficult, demanding, perfectionist. But washed up? That's a new one. Especially coming from someone whose idea of comedy is humiliating guests on national television. Kimmel was flailing now, his desperation evident to everyone watching. I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm trying to have a real conversation, and you're the one who can't handle it. Ford's smile was sharp as winter. A real conversation would involve listening, Jimmy. It would involve respect. It would involve some basic human decency. What you're doing isn't conversation, it's performance art. Bad performance art. The production team was in chaos now, with assistants running back and forth, trying to figure out how to salvage what had become an unmitigated disaster. But Kimmel, perhaps sensing that his career was imploding in real time, made one final, desperate play. "You know what, Harrison? If you don't like how I run my show, there's the door. Nobody's forcing you to be here. If you're too much of a prima donna to handle a little friendly ribbing, then maybe you should just leave." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ford looked at him with something approaching genuine pity, then turned to address the audience directly for the first time all evening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the studio without any trace of the anger or frustration that would have been completely justified. "I want to apologize to you for what you've had to witness tonight. You came here expecting entertainment, and instead you've been subjected to something that reflects poorly on everyone involved in producing it." The grace of the statement, delivered in the midst of such hostility, was breathtaking. Several audience members actually applauded, which only made Kimmel's face redder. "Don't apologize for me," Kimmel snapped. "I don't need your condescension." Ford turned back to him with genuine surprise. "Condescension? Jimmy, I'm trying to help you salvage something from this disaster. But if you're determined to go down with the ship, that's your choice." "I don't need your help," Kimmel shouted, finally losing all pretense of control. "I don't need anything from you. In fact, I think this interview is over. Security, please escort Mr. Ford from the building." The request was so absurd, so completely inappropriate, that for a moment nobody moved. Ford looked around the studio, taking in the shocked faces of the crew, the mortified expressions of the audience, and the desperate panic in his publicist's eyes. "Security," Ford said, his voice carrying just a hint of the dry humor that had made him famous. "For a talk show guest, Jimmy, you've managed to accomplish something I didn't think was possible. You've made me feel sorry for you." He turned to leave, but Kimmel couldn't resist one final shot. "That's right, walk away. Just like you always do when things get difficult. Run back to your trailer and your demands and your inflated sense of self-importance." Ford paused at the edge of the stage and looked back one last time. When he spoke, his words were quiet but carried clearly through the studio's sound system. "Jimmy, I've been doing this job for longer than you've been alive. I've worked with directors who screamed, producers who lied, and co-stars who tried to sabotage scenes. But in 40 years of making movies, I have never encountered anyone as unprofessional as you've been tonight. That's not an insult, it's just a fact. And facts, as you've demonstrated, are something you have trouble handling." With that, Harrison Ford walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a host whose career would never fully recover from the spectacular public meltdown he had just orchestrated. The audience sat in stunned silence as security, embarrassed and confused, made no move to follow Ford as he exited with his dignity intact. What started as a routine promotional appearance had become a masterclass in grace under pressure, a demonstration of what true professionalism looks like when confronted with its complete opposite. The contrast between Ford's measured responses and Kimmel's escalating desperation painted a picture that no amount of editing could fix. The lesson was clear. Respect is earned, not demanded, and when you're in the wrong, doubling down only makes the fall that much harder. In trying to diminish a Hollywood legend, Jimmy Kimmel had instead revealed exactly why that legend status was so well-deserved. So what do you think? Was Jimmy Kimmel completely out of line, or was he just trying to create compelling television? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go behind the scenes of Hollywood's most dramatic moments.